I shared with you that I'm very thematic. Matter of fact, this is not the first time I've shared that with the listening audience in terms of us or me being thematic whenever I program the shows. And sure enough, this month, what I attempted to do, and I actually have done, is I have selected women because it is Women's History Month. Just like last month in February, I attempted to select African Americans because it was Black History Month. And sure enough, as you know, last week we had our guest, Dr. Joy, on, Dr. Joy Ohaya, and she was on as a part of Women's History Month. And I have yet another powerful woman with us this morning. And it is none other than Deborah Santana. And Deborah Santana, our editor, Deborah Santana, is an author, seeker, and activist for peace and social justice. She is founder of Do a Little, a nonprofit that serves women and girls in the areas of health, education, and happiness. In 2005, she published a memoir, Space Between the Stars, My Journey to an Open Heart, and has produced 5 short documentary films. She is mother to 3 beloved adult children, Salvador, a songwriter and instrumental artist, Stella, a singer-songwriter, and Angelica, an archivist and film producer. She is a leadership donor to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture and has a master's degree in philosophy and religion with a concentration in women's spirituality. 3 years ago, when author-activist Deborah Santana decided to publish All the Women in My Family Sing, she felt a growing need to illuminate the diversity and complexity of women's experiences in the world. We had the opportunity to interview, or I'm going to have the opportunity to interview Miss Santana this morning as we talk about that and actually all of her work. We don't limit it to just that one particular book, but we're going to talk about all of her work. So, Deborah Santana, welcome to the Reading Circle microphones.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for rising early. Where are you calling out of?
I'm actually calling out of New York City this morning.
All right, so we're on the same time zone. That's good because sometimes, and the listening audience know, a lot of times my guests are more than one would think. A lot of times my guests are calling from California. So when it's like 7 o'clock this time, it's 4 o'clock in the morning their time. So at least you didn't have to get up too early. I mean, it's early, but not too early. Right. All right, so I tell you what, let's kind of roll the clock back to like in the bio just now. We read about being an activist, an author, for peace and social justice. We have the editor. Where did kind of all of this begin? Let's roll this back to were you like that in grammar school, grade school, high school, college? I mean, where did this begin?
Well, I was born into a family that really were activists and had to be activists. My paternal grandparents came from Louisiana and came into the San Francisco Bay Area, ending up in Oakland and building a church. And my mother's family is Irish-English, and my mother was born in Texas. So I had these parents who, in the late 1940s, met and married when it was still illegal in California for miscegenation.
Right.
So it was not legal for them to get married. So I had this fiery Irish-English feminist mother who fell in love with my musician father, and they both had their own legacies of social activism and then created a legacy for my sister and me.
So I guess, in some respects, I can say happy St. Patrick's Day to you.
Exactly. I forget about that sometimes, but yes, you can.
Yes, today, because I did my Ancestry.com DNA background. I did that, and I think I'm 2% Irish. It's like I'm like 80, 83, 84%, somewhere around there that comes from Africa, and then the last 16, 17% breaks out into other regions around the world. And if I remember my numbers correctly, 2% of me is Irish.
Excellent. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yes, indeed. So I was saying earlier when I came on the air, we have green on somewhere, whether it's over or under or inner or outer, we have on some green to represent St. Patrick's Day. So because you're absolutely right, during that time frame, not only in California, but probably in many states in the United States, that was illegal. And some of those laws didn't change over until, and when we say 50 years ago, that's still close. Some of those laws didn't change over till 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, depending on where you are in the country. So what was that like now growing up as a child of the mixed parentage in terms of the races and what the country was like at that time. I mean, did that, like in school, did you have to constantly defend, or were you looked at strange, or folks were asking you questions, or what was going on there?
Well, when I was growing up in San Francisco is a pretty liberal city, and my elementary school and all of my schools were completely integrated. So it was very different than growing up on the East Coast or in the South or in even the middle of the country, of course. So it wasn't that I had oppression in my city or growing up, but it was in the world, it was in the collective consciousness, and we grew up in the civil rights movement and always fighting for the rights of others and fighting for our own rights to be seen as complete and full, productive, wonderful, beautiful human beings. And so that's really what pushes me. That's what the intention of this anthology that I just edited and we published, All the Women in My Family Sing. It's to raise the voices of women of color who are often marginalized, or voices are pushed to the side. And certainly we aren't able to get publishing deals as mainstream America.
Absolutely. And see, I'm glad, because we're working our way right up through. I tried to do kind of like a little timeline for the listening audience. And you kind of got me to the book, which is where I want to go to ultimately. But more importantly, the reason behind the book. And like I was just saying a couple of minutes ago, in terms of race relations, I'll tell you, it's roller coasterish, if there is such a word. It ebbs and flows, goes backwards and forwards, because right now it seems like we're going backwards to a degree. But the same thing has occurred in terms of the genders. And exactly. When you think in terms of, like, March has been set aside as Women's History Month. But when you think in terms of women's rights, even the right to vote, and I know in some people's mind, they think 50, 60, 70 years is a long time, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not.
No.
So we're talking...
We are always trying to push forward as women, as people of color. You know, it's today our country and our world are more divided than even 3 years ago.
Correct.
When I began this project. Civil rights are being challenged like never before, or like not recently. And boundaries are being inflicted on us by a patriarchal system of oppression. And, of course, sexual abuse and gender-based violence seem more pervasive than ever. So when I thought... when I was in my teens and in San Francisco, and, you know, the Black Panthers were in Oakland, and Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting for civil rights, and Malcolm X was talking about freedom, and Rosa Parks refused to to get up from her seat on the bus. All of that formed me as a coming-of-age young woman. And now nothing seems to have changed. I know many laws have changed, and many places there is access in terms of where people of color and women can go, how we can lead, what boards we can sit on, what jobs we can have. But the internal, pervasive, institutionalized racism and gender-based violence is really still there. It
really is. And I work in a school system, and I lead an urban elementary school, and I really have a hard time helping my constituency understand where we've been and why it's so important that they need to understand where we've been to understand how we need to approach where we're going.
Yes, and education is the most important tool, right?
It really is. It really is. And every day I'm on that battlefield trying to help them academically as well as socially and on this activist front in terms of understanding, because the bulk of my school is Hispanic and African American. I mean, we're talking like maybe 56, 44, or however the numbers work out. Just few percentages higher in the Hispanic categories versus African American. But I try to help them understand either way, you still came from the same area. The boats just kind of stopped a little bit earlier on the various Caribbean islands as they made their way to the United States. But it really, so the spirit of activism, like you said, certainly it has not died, but it really needs to resurface like never before, because all of the things that we're activists against has resurfaced stronger than ever.
And one of my focuses, I have to say, is I am not going to be defined by other people's lack of information.
Correct.
So the mythology in our country is that white settlers made America great. And my philosophy is, and I was raised in this way, this country belongs to Native Americans. We're on Native American land, and the people, the Africans who came here and were enslaved, built the country.
Correct. I'm of that same ilk.
Yes, for free. And yet, with all of that said, I'm not going to let the oppression define me, because I and all of us are beautifully created, wonderful children of God, and we are all equal. Whether someone wants to or has the education to understand that is not my problem. My intention is to go forward and give as much information as possible and tell as many stories, which is why the anthology is important, to illumine people who don't yet know the truth.
No, you're absolutely right, and I could not have said it better or agree with you more. And I'm looking at the page here. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. The page that I read the bio from. So I can, and that, exactly how you described yourself just now, shines through even photographically. I can see you're a proud African-American biracial woman, and exactly what you just said, that will not allow anyone else to define you. And I don't blame you. I don't blame you a bit. And as you now put the anthology together, you said something that was critical a couple of minutes ago, and that was the ability to tell our story. And if you look historically, particularly in the African tradition, stories has been our way. Yes.
Most traditions, I mean, and the griots who tell stories in Africa and in all cultures, all we had before written language was passing on the story. And I just think in the beauty of these essays that are in the anthology are each woman's voice is different. There are 69 women who have an essay in this anthology of all different ethnic backgrounds, and many are of varied ethnicities, pulling them together, and all of them talk about this same issue. Who am I? What is my standpoint?
Right.
I'm going to define that standpoint myself. One woman who I just love writes, well, yes, people ask me all the time, because they look at the outside of me and they see that I'm Korean, and they ask me if I like Korean food. No, I like Tex-Mex food. And the stereotypes are completely shattered.
Yes.
And that's what I love. It makes me thrilled and full of passion for these women who are standing up and saying, look, we are not what you perceive. Look beyond the outer and listen to who we are.
Absolutely. And see, and again, there's another connection here in your title, that just as storytelling was important, so was or is music. And your title is All the Women in My Family Sing. Talk a little bit about how you even came up with the title.
Well, after I wrote my first memoir that you mentioned, Space Between the Stars, My Journey to an Open Heart, I began working on my second memoir. And I worked on it, wrote it, completed it, edited it, started over, did it again, and I was going to title my second memoir, All the Women in My Family Sing, because one night when I was asleep, I dreamt that title. And yet, as I continued to work on my second memoir, I really did not feel I needed my story to be out in the world again. I love supporting other women, as you can tell from my Do a Little Foundation. I want to support women and girls around the world to have a voice, or to get an education, or to follow their dreams. So when I dreamt this title, I kept holding it for something. I didn't know what. And so when I started working on the anthology, I said, remember that title I dreamt? It's perfect for this anthology. No, it is. And
again, repetitively speaking, in terms of March being Women's History Month, and I intentionally scheduled, I don't know if you remember the emails that were going to make for March. And my guest last week was, and be honest with you, most of my author guests are female. Every now and again I'll get some males, but most of them are female. But I intentionally scheduled females in this month, and especially your book was perfect. I said, this is perfect for Women's History Month. I wouldn't have it, I could have done it in Black History Month, but I wouldn't have it any other way in terms of theme. and this one fit perfectly because this is my thinking in terms of even like your background, history, so forth and so on. And I get it from the power thing. I get it from the money thing, the economic thing. But I never quite understood this whole notion of difference being a negative compared with difference being an asset. Years ago, Jesse Jackson talked about the quilt, his grandmother's quilt or whoever's quilt it was, about all the different color patches is what made the quilt beautiful. And I'm paraphrasing. Mm-hmm. But it's the same thing in this country. All the different races and backgrounds is what makes the country beautiful. And yet, in many instances, or too many instances, it's this whole notion of pushing sameness.
Mm-hmm. Well, I write in my foreword that DNA, the hereditary material in all humans and organisms, is made of more than 3 million chemical bases. More than 99% of these bases are the same in all people. Through genetics, our mother and father create the traits that determine eye color, hair texture, and the characteristics that connect us to our nuclear family. But our universal need for food and water, the search for happiness, love, and prosperity belong to everyone.
I mean, I'm looking again at this page.
We are more alike than we're different.
Yes, because and I to break it down very simple, especially when I'm talking to kids, if we all cut our fingers, that blood is red.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what color skin is on the outside. If you scrape your knee on the ground or if you cut your finger, the blood is going to come out red. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking here, I see women of black, Irish, Japanese, Mexican, Spanish descent, as well as others are in there. And again, depending on, okay, you got women have that double whammy going on. You got the whole gender thing going on, as well as depending on which ethnicity you are, where you get popped 2 or 3 times. So now you're a Mexican woman. That's seen one way versus, a Mexican man. And so forth and so on. So it's great that you gave these women an opportunity to tell their stories. And I'm sure they had stories. And see, I'm partial to them because I've always been around women. Even though there was 2 of us, me and my sister, I was always around my mother and my aunts. And then ultimately, as I grew up, I wound up with 4 daughters.
Congratulations.
So I am in women's corner for a lot of various different reasons. Some may say they're biased. I need women to succeed because I have 4 daughters that I'm looking for them to succeed. Actually, they are. The youngest one is 16. She's about to get ready to go off to college shortly. But I have one that's 28, one 23, one 22, one 16. And I'm really proud of them. And I'm always happy because, at the school, matter of fact, in my district that I'm in, we just had our first female superintendent. She was just elected and ordained or whatever you want to call it, the past couple of weeks or so. And there's been a lot of other positions that's been headed now by females. So everybody's saying it's the year of the woman. And one of my colleagues said, no, it's the century of the woman. I said, okay, I can go with that. That works for me. But
yeah, it's just fighting for these firsts.
Right.
It drives me a little bit crazy because in 2018 that we are still
saying the word first. Yes.
So many firsts, and yet I applaud that, and yet it's also frustrating. And I meditate every day, so I have to go to that place of inner knowing and inner peace and absolute oneness with spirit to know that is not who we are. We are so inwardly, we are so beyond where we are outwardly. And yet because the makeup of our country has been this dominant white patriarchal system,
right?
And we're one of the unusual countries in many ways because we do have so much freedom and we do have the right to protest. We have the right to voice our opinion. It's written into our Constitution. And there are many other countries where women and others do not have that right. So I don't want to not count my blessings, but it's still not enough.
Well, I tell you what, earlier in the year, or last year, whenever it wasn't long after the inauguration, whenever the women had to protest. And that was the first time I'd seen women protest in the country, but that was the first time I'd seen a worldwide protest. I was looking on the news that women in all countries were protesting at the same time.
Yes, which is so. I was in D.C. for the march, and we have actually America Ferrera's speech from the march in 2017 in the anthology, and I had chills the entire time. None of us knew how big any of the marches were going to be, but I didn't know, and I was so fortunate because the people I was with, we were probably at about 50,000 back from the stage. I had no idea there were another 450,000 people behind us. So the power of us gathering and saying, we are here and we are not going to be ignored, and we are going to resist until this administration and this oppression changes. So that, you're right, all around the world, women said, time's up, before this year when we said time's up again.
No, it is. And there's a whole lot of things going on simultaneously in terms of the activism and the uprising and the speaking out. I mean, you have the whole Me Too, or I believe that's what it's called, the whole movement there where women are speaking out of having been abused and sexually harassed and so forth and so on. So all of that's coming out. And as I said, that was the first time I had ever seen, I'd seen U.S. protests, but I had never seen a simultaneous worldwide.
Yes, you're right. It was so beautiful, and it's continuing. And I just want to give one quote from USA Today. They reviewed our anthology, and it was a long review, but one part says, "We are in a time when the words Me Too have become a hashtag that signals solidarity among women who have suffered the trauma of sexual harassment and abuse. But all the women in my family sing illustrates how that phrase encompasses so much more."
No, it really does.
Yes, and I love that they said that because, of course, Tarana Burke, who started the Me Too movement 10 years ago,
right,
did not get her due until a few months after the hashtag was adopted by women in Hollywood. But again, people are working, women are moving forward, we're claiming our space, and we want to lead, and we want to lead in an equal way. And one of the studies that I did when I was working on my master's was studying matriarchal societies around the world. They're in Guam, they're in Southeast Asia, and when women are in power, women do not rule in a hierarchical way where men are left out. Women rule in a consensus, like the Native American way. And so part of what we want to do is lead with our power that is inclusive, not exclusive.
Now, how is the movements of today either different or similar? Because I remember back in the 70s, I was a child at that time, but I remember the whole burning of the bras, the whole movement at that point. Mm-hmm. Is this an extension of that, the same as that, or different from that?
Well, it is built upon that because all of the movements come from trying to break through boundaries, trying to unbind ourselves from that which is trying to keep us hidden or marginalized or not living our true light. And it's interesting, yesterday I went to the Whitney, and they have an exhibition, the Whitney Museum, and they have an exhibition called The Incomplete History of Protest. And it's their own collection of years of protest, decades of protest around the world, but mostly in this country. And it's very powerful to see that the language, some of the language is the same. And when we were protesting the Vietnam War, when I was a teenager, we were doing the same things. We want human rights for all people. So what women are doing today, I think, is very, very similar. It's extremely similar. We're saying we want things to be better for women. We want women to have equal access. We want women artists to be in museums at the same level as men. We want women to be in CEOs at the same level as men. It's not that we're not qualified, obviously.
Correct.
It's that we are not given an opportunity to sit at the table. And as Shirley Chisholm said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair.
Correct. Interestingly enough, you mentioned Shirley Chisholm. I told you I was a principal of a school. A couple of years ago, I had a descendant of hers. She was either a great niece or a great niece or something like that. But she was in Shirley Chisholm's family. I was like, wow, you just never know. But in terms of the various movements, and I'm kind of picking apart your activist side there and the whole feminism thing. Because again, as a child, I remember very clearly the whole burn the bra thing, the whole, women can do whatever jobs men can do. And my thinking, even as a kid in the teen, well, I didn't quite see, again, okay, if a woman wants to drive a truck, why can't she drive a truck? I mean, if that's what she wants to do, that's what she chooses to do. But for folks that get being able to do a job that was, for the most part, ascribed to males, how do you now square with people that say, well, if she's a truck driver, she must be manly? I mean, there's you can be a truck driver and still be feminine. That's where I'm trying to get to.
Well, I think that I'm not really around people who think like that or talk like that. But I don't want, again, it's that saying and that belief I have is that I don't want other people to define
my
reality. And I don't want other people's ignorance or the way they look at the world, which has boundaries. It has bands of restriction. And I don't want to live like that. And I also don't want to judge others. I don't want to judge. I want to have a conversation with people who don't agree as I agree. But when it comes to human rights, I just want people to be free, and the law protects us, and we don't have to wear who we are as anyone else suggests or tries to demand. And I have had the wonderful privilege I was on the board of Artists for New South Africa when we were fighting against apartheid in the 1980s, and so I've had the immense pleasure of knowing Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his wife Leah and sitting at the feet of Nelson Mandela. And Archbishop Tutu is one of the greatest feminists in the world and human rights advocates and has no boundaries, even when he was an archbishop of the LGBTQ community. He's the greatest supporter of everyone living who they are. And I can't have my mind diminished by people who don't think like that.
Absolutely. Last year, as a matter of fact, we emailed each other since. I had Martin Luther King's nephew on the show, Isaac Newton Farris Jr. And Isaac and I were talking last year, and we went back over it again this year whenever he made commentary in terms of our current president. But there's a difference between being a racist and racially ignorant. Mm-hmm. And to your point of what you're saying, well, not allow anybody to define you, because most of the folks who are trying to define folks are usually in that racially ignorant bucket. In other words, they don't really know. Don't get me wrong. They can be in the racist bucket. Make it clear. They can be. But a lot of people, for whatever reason, really are racially ignorant. Back to what I was saying earlier in terms of, I don't understand why you wouldn't see the difference as a good thing compared with it always being seen as something negative. Again, the quilt is beautiful because of the various colors and the patches or whatever you want to call it.
Absolutely. And I just want to read a little bit from Marian Wright Edelman's essay, The Tireless Indispensable. She says, in every major American social reform movement, women, including women of color, have always played a critical role. Women at the forefront, acting as catalysts for progress when it needs to happen, make the front pages and the history books. But women have also always been the invisible backbone, unseen but strong, of transforming social movements and of all anchor institutions in society, our families, congregations, schools, and communities, employing behind-the-scenes, quiet, essential leadership and organizational communication and fundraising skills to get things done.
That was never more evident, and they weren't invisible per se in this election down in Alabama. Because it was the women and the African American women more so that turned that tide.
That's right. That's right. We're evolving. You know what? Women, well, we're all evolving, hopefully, but women have now taken their place. We've taken our places. We've been moving in, but now we're brandishing a new, very, very powerful energy. And you're right, Alabama was perfect proof of that, and all the women who are running for office now. I think in the United States there's over 500 women who are running for office.
Absolutely. So now talk to me a little bit about, because you were in a field, I mean, because I remember, again, I have a very good memory in terms of especially political, racial type things. because I just find the 60s is to me one of the most fascinating decades. I mean, really, I mean, when I look at from 60 to 70, and then as we went into the 70s, that is a fascinating time for me. But you're coming through now as an editor. Talk a little bit about, even what that was like entering in that field, because there was and there are still many people, back to defining, who really believe that black people don't read. And so, and I know whenever, what is it, Terry Wood, or whenever, I'm trying to think of the book that kind of came out and folks really took off, and that's whenever they thought black people started reading. No, black people always read. But what was it like?
You mean Terry McMillan?
Yes, McMillan, and there's the other one, Woods, Terry Woods, that wrote. And I'll have to pull up her book, but it was like in the hood kind of genre type thing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's whenever, because there's a whole genre is the name of it, and it'll come to me before we're done. But when that book came out, that's whenever you got all these different books that were kind of in that same area. And that's whenever everybody said, oh, black people begin to read now. No, black people always read. But what was it like for you now entering that field? Well,
so I published this book with my very good friend Chris Bronstein, who has a woman's publishing company called Nothing But the Truth. And she has had this publishing company for 5 years. And reading the statistics about the overall publishing industry, she asked me if I would publish and edit this book. In the overall publishing industry, 79% of those working identify as white. In the editorial departments, 82% identify as white. So that means that the lens through which we are receiving books to read are coming through a very non-inclusive lens. So we wanted to publish a book that was completely created by women of color. The beautiful cover is by Fabiana Rodriguez, a local artist in the Bay Area who travels all over the world to teach art and live art. The editing, of course, was done by women of color. The press was done by women of color. The graphic design was done by women of color. We're wanting to start a movement. We want to change those statistics that are so limiting. We want to tell women of color to go into publishing. We want to tell all people to read books by women of color.
Yes.
So on our website, allthewomenninmyfamilysing.com, we have a call to action page. It has the statistics that I just read, and it has a list of women of color books. So there are nonfiction and fiction titles that are going to be changing all the time and adding new ones. So hopefully we'll have 500 or more by the end of this year. But that's our call to action. Our call to action is just like we want to change academic institutions and the movie industry and the medical field. We want people of color to be accepted and revered for their talents in all of these areas, including publishing, so that we can have diverse voices.
Absolutely. And interesting enough, I have some of my loyal listeners. I had just found it on the internet, as well as one of my listeners texted me. I was referring to Terry Woods, and the book was at that time True to the Game. And when Terry's book came out back in the 90s or the 80s, I believe it was late 80s or either early 90s, that book now took off and had folks took off into a whole nother genre. It was kind of like the street crimes, that whole area. But at that point, that's whenever, it just opened up a whole new world in terms of the area. Matter of fact, as I looked on the internet, I see the customers who viewed this book also, brought back to mind Sister Soldier with The Coldest Winter Ever.
Right.
And it was along that same time frame. But I remember very clearly when Terry Woods came out with True to the Game. And so you're absolutely right in terms of the perception and the projection of what's going forward, depending on what publishing company you have to go through. Mm-hmm. And so that is a wonderful stance to have folks really make an intentional effort. And again, because you're pro-black or pro-African-American does not mean you're anti-white. And because you're pro-white doesn't mean you're anti-black. It's kind of like, but you need to be able to support both, or certainly be able to support your own.
Well, and we need to know who's in the room. So One of my most important, and I can't help it, it is absolutely in me, and there's no way I can avoid it. When I walk into a room, when I walk into a meeting, when I walk into anything, I notice if there are people of color in the room. If there are not people of color in the room or in management, those people are the ones who have to change, and they have to open the doors. They have to become allies to changing the playing field.
Correct.
And that is something that is incredibly important. And there are a lot of people in California, especially in the tech industry. There's a company that was started called Code 2040, and of course they're teaching young people of color how to code to get into the tech world. And and they go into corporations and they say, no, this is how you need to change this. We're not coming in here to tell you, please hire these people. We're coming in to show you how you can change this world that is not diverse. So I think that's really important.
Now I'm looking on the Amazon page of the description in terms of the book. It says, "All the Women in My Family Sing" is an anthology documenting the experiences of women of color at the dawn of the 21st century. It is a vital collection of prose and poetry whose topics range from the pressures of being the vice president of a Fortune 500 company to escaping the killing fields of Cambodia to the struggles inside immigration, identifying romance and self-worth. What was it like for you to did you get a chance to speak to all your different contributors, or did everybody just submit everything in writing, or did you get a chance to interview them or talk with them? What was that like for you?
Well, in the beginning, they submitted, so we had over 300 submissions that came in 3 years ago, and so first it was I had two readers helping me to cull through all of the essays and determine which ones were finalists to be in the anthology, and then I had other editors helping edit the pieces, and we did speak with a lot of the authors so they could reshape their pieces. But now on the book tour, and especially in California where we've done probably already about 12 events and book signings, then I've gotten to really know the authors and hear their voices and know about their lives, and it's thrilling. I love the book events. We are going into Boston on Monday, and we have an event at Harvard Bookstore on Monday, and at Disneyville Books on Wednesday. And when the women speak their words into the atmosphere, I can feel electricity. So it's been wonderful getting to know them. They're all powerful women. You know, of the 69, 59 of them have undergraduate or graduate degrees. Of those, 10 have MFAs, 6 have law degrees, 5 are PhDs, and 1 is a Fulbright scholar.
Well, I tell you what, when you just said the Harvard Bookstore, I've been in that bookstore because I did some study time up there, and I've been in the Harvard Bookstore, so that should be fun. Matter of fact, I'm trying to pull up the professor I had up there, Deborah Jewell. I got to think of her last name. I tell you, I'm having times with names lately, but Deborah Jewell, hopefully she gets a chance to go to that signing because she's on that campus. But that should be a lot of fun. And I can only imagine, because again, especially with everything that's going on, because you have the scandals that's going on with the president. Even when he was as a candidate, the fact that he was able to get in making the commentary, and I get the locker room talk thing. I get that. But the fact that came out, and yet still.
Well, I don't get the locker room talk thing. And, you know, I'm married to a man who, like you, was very, he had 4 sisters.
Right.
3 sisters, and Carl Lumley, and he reveres women so very much, and he doesn't get how not only, you know, we men think like that, but then have the audacity to speak that, especially when you're a public figure. But it's a level of consciousness.
Correct.
You know, it's a level of consciousness that does not level up to integrity, you know, and so treating women as animals almost.
Right.
It's not right.
You're absolutely right. And when I say I get the locker room talk, I mean, in general, men speak about 3 things. It's usually women, sports, or cars. And I don't want to stereotype men, but for the most part, that's what their conversation about. But not to that degree and that commentary of what was exposed there, and to the point where that's his behavior. And yet...
Exactly.
And
well, again, there is some reason that our country is going through this, and part of it, everyone has their theories, you know, post-Obama, just the underlying frustration of white supremacy.
Right.
So there's so many theories. But again, I want to focus on moving forward because this is an aberration, and it's very harmful for our country in the whole world.
It really is.
As well as being harmful for those of us who are living it.
No, it really is. And, if we were to get into my theories on this whole thing, we'd be sitting here all day. And in terms of, I know a couple of weeks ago, my pastor was saying in a part of his sermon, he's saying you can't have a miracle without a problem. Like, in other words, you can't. And right now we have a problem. So some miracles ought to be coming out of this. And maybe part of the miraculous is exactly what you're saying. This uprising of women saying, wait a minute, we're not going to take this. We're not taking this. We're not, because in all honesty, this latest scandal may wind up being the straw on the camel's back. I don't know. He's kind of been Teflon since, but this whole thing with the Daniels woman may be the straw. I don't know. We'll see. But again,
just that we have to focus on a person who is supposedly leading our country. We have to focus on this low level of consciousness.
Yes.
It's not really scandalous as much as it is ridiculous, and
yes.
that we cannot move forward away from this, all of this talk that has nothing to do with the illumination of helping people and moving forward and human rights. And it's going to backfire because we cannot continue. His
right.
motivation is all financial.
Right.
And our country, he has rolled back so many of dear President Obama's forward-moving
right.
policies and executive orders. And just the fact that now he's rolled back the restrictions on using pesticides. I mean, there are reasons that we have certain laws, and they are
correct.
To protect our children and all of us. So anyway, we've got to move through this. Women are going to move this forward. We are going to continue to resist, and we are going to continue to speak out, and we're going to try to continue to give truth as leadership.
Do you have the opportunity to go around to schools or talk to young girls or teenagers? And because I know you have your organization, does that allow you the opportunity to speak to girls?
Oh, yes, definitely.
So what do you tell like a 5-year-old girl or a 6-year-old or a kindergarten or either a 4th grade or 5th grade girl? What advice do you give them?
Well, I'm not one to really give advice as much as to ask questions.
Okay, all right.
And so and especially with young people, I think a lot of us elders go in and give advice.
Uh-huh.
And so I like to ask questions. What do you see? Where are you? What do you think? And to be honest, young children and young people have pure thoughts. They're the ones I've met.
Yes, they do.
They have pure thoughts, and they see the truth, and they don't want to harm other people in general. I know there are people who have been taught that, children who have been taught that by their families.
Right.
But so, it's the same. I don't really tell children anything different than I tell adults, is freedom, live for freedom. Find your passion and work hard to meet your goals and set an intention. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? Who do you want to help? And how are you going to pay your rent for being here?
Exactly. Now, this is one of the questions I ask the teachers that I work with all the time. When you're done teaching this lesson, what do you want the kids to walk out of that classroom knowing? Mm-hmm. You have your book out there now. You have this one, your latest one that we're talking about. What do you want the reader to take away?
Well, I want people to take away that the stories in this book are for healing. They are to bring people together, to give us an opportunity to erase assumptions we may have about others, people who don't seem to be like us. I want people to see with fresh eyes and have curiosity so that we can all see that we are more alike than we are different, and so that we can know that there are so many voices in this world, and these women's voices create a chorus of cultural refrains. So I want people to see that there are victories and challenges for everyone, whether you're an innovator, a CEO, a teacher, that it is glorious to live authentically in our identities.
Absolutely right. I just think, and I just had this conversation yesterday, because again, working with kids all the time, working with females and males, I always tell the little girls, I said, you all have, first off, women have some women know the power that they have. Some use it deviously, some use it, and not enough to me use it to our benefit in terms of wisely. And I'll tell you why I say that in a couple of seconds. But I always tell little girls, I tell you what, when that young man comes to you on your telephone number or email or text or whatever it is, ask him to see, let me see your report card. And I always tell a young lady, you got to have your stuff together too, but ask to see his report card. And then this is a guy that's bringing you straight Fs. You push back on him and say, you know what, whenever you show me some A's, then I'll think about giving you my telephone number. Deborah, I am convinced our academic achievement, particularly in our males, will rise like you wouldn't believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's spoken truly as a father of 4 daughters. I think that for me, women, and I actually wish that I had done this. I wish I had been more focused on my own education than in being with someone. The first time I married, I was 22. And
we have similar stories.
Yes, and it was fine, but I didn't really focus enough on myself. And I think for young girls to focus on their own light, their own intentions, and where they want to go, to set goals, that's really what I think is important, probably because I kind of rolled myself to the side in my first marriage and lived his life a little bit, even though it was a good life, and I have 3 beautiful children, and I traveled the world, and I eventually received my master's and all of that. I still think that women need to learn to not deny themselves their own goals.
I could not agree with you more. Because, and again, and I say this across the board, whether it's male or female, like if we love ourselves first, then we can focus on loving somebody else. A lot of times we jump into things not really knowing who we are. And then we get in there.
That's the process.
Right.
That's the process.
That's exactly right. And so a lot of times, you're looking for somebody else to fulfill that alleged other 50%, other half, before knowing your own half. And so, that's the other advice, if you will, that I constantly give kids, based on my own experience as well. I said, look, if focus on your education, get your education, live by yourself or with a roommate for a little while, travel the world, and then, you see somebody you want to settle down with, that's great. And if you don't, that's great too, because, there's always that stigma with someone being single. That's another thing that more so women than men. Another stereotype, another pressure that's put on women. Well, how come you're not married yet? What's wrong with you? Why are you still single? That's something that has to change as well.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I believe that life is a school.
Correct.
And we never stop learning, but we have to search out new information, just like increasing our vocabulary. It doesn't just happen. It happens by reading books. It happens by expanding our curiosity about life. And another thing I just want to say, because I'm sure our time is probably wrapping up soon, I want men to read this book.
Yes.
So stories in this book will truly give men an illumined perspective about women, and it may even touch their hearts so that they don't look at women as objects or as not as equals. So I really want men to read this book.
And I join you with that because I have a copy of the book. And thank you for the promo copy, by the way. I join you with that. Men read, and again, and I still do. I read Essence and Cosmo and all of that because I want to kind of know, okay, what are women looking at or reading that's possibly influencing? So by all means, in terms of this book, I have a copy of it myself. You can read one of the contributions at a time. You don't have to sit there and try to read the whole book like a chapter book. You can read 1 or 2 a day or however you want to do it. But I agree with Deborah there in terms of this is not a book just for women. Now, the title of the book is All the Women in My Family Sing, but that does not mean it is a book just for women.
Right. And the subtitle is Women Write the World, Essays on Equality, Justice, and Freedom.
So you're right. We are getting near the end. We're not quite at the end yet because it's 8 o'clock, and I'm going to do the same thing we did in the 7 o'clock hour in terms of getting the weather and all that. And then we talk for a little bit longer. And then at the end of the interview, I give you the opportunity to promote, and you can say anything with the exception of the dollar amount. But in terms of where you're going to be, book signings, websites, how to get the book, so forth and so on, shout outs you want to do to your husband or your kids or whoever, anybody and your colleagues, your peers, you have the opportunity to do that when we come to the end. And I turn the mic off and let you go. But we're not at that point yet. And for those of you in the listening audience, I hope you've been with me since 7. I hope you've been with me since 6. But if you're not, certainly by 7, whenever my guest joins me. My guest this morning is Deborah Santana. And she is an activist. She's a woman. And she's an activist for women. And not just for women, but it's this whole notion of they've been marginalized. The races have been marginalized. People, and we're all, like you just said, human rights. That's the thing that always boggles my mind too, Deborah. It's like we're all human beings. And we can actually treat other human beings just with no feeling whatsoever. Just with that's what I'm sitting here looking again. I was looking on Twitter earlier, and last night I was watching the news, and there was this whole debate over whether or not this man in the FBI, who's a couple of days from retiring and getting his pension, was going to be fired or not. And it's kind of like, all right, you get this man down to the last couple of days before he can retire and receive his full benefits, and now you're going to fire him the day or two before. To me, that was heartless. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But I mean, again, that's just like, that's where we are in terms of the treatment of other human beings.
Yes, we're lacking some of the beautiful leaders that we're not. I don't know if we're lacking them, but we're lacking access to their voices. As when we had Shirley Chisholm and Dr. Martin Luther King,
right,
and Malcolm X, and we had people who got a chance at the microphone to say something profound, right, to show us that no, the way forward is only if we move together. If we try to cut our fellow citizens off at the knees and ruin their lives after they've given this tremendous service,
right, what
good does that do us?
Right.
So, I'm looking for those. I mean, we've got Ta-Nehisi Coates now. We've got so many people who are leading. We have Dr. Joy DeGreer. We have so many people. We have the America Ferreras who are speaking out, and we have so many people who are speaking out and leading us. But we need to hear those voices rather than this constant gossip and
Absolutely.
all of the things that are going wrong in our country.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to change over, and then I'm going to take you to, I'm assuming, and maybe it's a bad assumption, I'll ask you a question. You've been to South Africa, correct?
Correct.
Okay, good. I'm asking that because next April, I'm heading there. April 2019, God willing, I'm heading to South Africa. So I want to ask you a little bit about that, and then we'll wrap up. So hang on. I just need to share the weather and change over to 8 o'clock hour, and we will be on with the last few minutes of the interview. But I want to ask you a question about South Africa because that's where I'm heading. All right before the 8 o'clock, before I change over into hour, I was talking with my guest, Deborah Santana. And I see there that she was talking about South Africa. So I asked her, talk to me a little bit about South Africa because I'm heading there next April, God willing. So what was that experience like?
Oh, gosh. Well, we went in, I think it was 2006, and we went with Artists for New South Africa, and it was to attend Archbishop Tutu's 75th birthday party in that was in Cape Town, I think. And
right.
so it was thrilling. We were a delegation of 25 artists and activists, and we went to see some of the programs that we had funded. And so we went to, and I made a short documentary about it that is called Road to Ingwavuma, because Ingwavuma is a place that at that time was the center of the AIDS pandemic. So we went to celebrate with Archbishop and Leah Tutu and all the people that went to his birthday celebration, but we also went to Robben Island and were given a tour at that time by Ahmed Kathrada, who was one of President Mandela's cellmates and warriors through the whole anti-apartheid movement. And Kathy just passed away 2 years ago, so we miss him tremendously. And we went on that tour and stood in Nelson Mandela's cell, as so many people who have traveled there have. And we were able to go to the Filani Orphanage, which was one of Archbishop Tutu's projects, and we went to hospitals, and it was a fabulous trip, and it humbled us, and yet we were also out seeing the beauty of South Africa and nature and breathing the fresh air of that country. So it was life-changing. And then finally we got to meet and sit at the feet of Mandela. And the short documentary I made just gives a few highlights, but it's really wonderful, and it's on my website, deborahsantana.com, called Road to Ingwavuma.
All right. Well, when you mentioned Desmond Tutu, I read a book earlier. It's co-written by him and the Dalai Lama. It's called The Book of Joy.
Oh, my gosh. I love that book.
I do, too. It was excellent.
I know. And they're both so full of joy. And they've been through, look at everything both of them have been through.
Yes.
And they choose joy.
Right. That's absolutely right, because that comes through loud and clear in the book. And again, that particular book is The Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. An excellent book. And, so as you said, as a matter of fact, when I was reading about it, I saw his name, that book popped back into my mind. And back, like I said, the names, like I always say, it'll come to me for the interview. When you were talking about going to Harvard, and I think she's still there. I know she was in the Graduate School of Education, but that was Deborah Jewel Sherman. So I hope if she's still there, I hope she gets a chance to get over there and get to your signing if she knows of it. But again, that's another Deborah. So Deborah Jewel Sherman, I hope she gets there to meet Deborah Santana. So, all right, we have now come down to the end of our interview, and we're talking about that wrap-up time where you have the opportunity to promote. And as I always tell folks, you can say anything with the exception of a dollar amount. Websites, anything else, you're free to promote. So I'm going to shut the mic off, and you have the opportunity to do that.
Thank you so much. Well, I just want to thank you for this wonderful interview. The book is All the Women in My Family Sing, Women Write the World, Essays on Equality, Justice, and Freedom. And you can purchase the book on our website. There are a link to a couple of online stores, or please go to your local bookstore and ask the book owner to purchase the book and sell it in their store. allthewomeninmyfamilysing.com is our website, and please read all about our authors and then go to our call to action page. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And again, I'm glad you were on the East Coast time. It wouldn't be too bad for you because, a lot of time I guess, well, I'm an early morning person anyway, so it didn't faze me. But,
yes, but again, I'm very grateful.
So I'm glad you're on East Coast time as well. I thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed speaking with you. And again, in terms of men reading the book, this is not a women's only book. Certainly women, we want you to read it because we want you to get some perspective, some inspiration, some encouragement. But men, we need you to read it as well so you can get some insight in terms of how we treat our sisters. And when I say sisters, I'm not necessarily talking about just black, this and the other one. I'm talking about this, that they're females. The fact that they're female alone, that's our sisters. Okay, so, and how we treat them. And like she said, we're not objectifying them. They're not a piece of property. They're not a piece of meat. They are just as qualified and capable as we are. The gender really has nothing to do with that. So again, Deborah, I salute you. Perfect guest for Women's History Month. And, for me, it's like Black History Month is 12 months, even though we pause in February. Women's History Month is 12 months as well. We just happen to pause in March.
Yes, exactly. Well, thank you so much. And all light and blessings on your life and your family.
Thank you. And same to you. All right. Take care now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye now. Well, that brings us to the conclusion of another edition of the Reading Circle with your host, Marc Medley. My guest this morning is Deborah Santana. And the book is All Women in My Family Sing. And is a compilation. All different women sharing their experiences in the book. I encourage you, as I do every week with each guest, to support their work, to get a copy of their book, whether you order it online, whether you go to the bookstore and have them order it, however you want to do that. As she said, particularly our African-American authors, our African-American editors, our African-American publishing houses. And I'm not saying you can't support the others, but if you want ours to live, If you want ours to survive, because you have this whole cadre of folks that say black people don't do nothing. And that's not true. But at the same time, when we are doing something, we have to support what we do. Otherwise, it's going to die. And unfortunately, that's what happens in too many of our African-American communities, or too many of them, because I don't like the word minority, so that's why I'm trying to stay away from it. But our people of color community, in terms of our businesses that we start, we don't support them. And then when they die, then we talk about them. So if you, as Deborah was just saying, we need to make sure we intentionally and consciously seek out African-American editors, African-American publishing houses, African-American authors, so forth and so on down the line, and support them. I'm not saying you cannot support or purchase from the others. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you do need to purchase from those of us who look like you to keep them going. So the book is All the Women in My Family Sing. The author is editor Deborah Santana, DeborahSantana.